At 1 in the morning on Christmas night, while carols still played, and the house glowed with golden lights, my world ended. I am Marissa Caldwell, and before the eyes of uncles, aunts, cousins, and neighbors, my parents stood and stripped me of my place in the family. My father's voice was steady, merciless, telling me I was no longer his daughter, while my mother looked away as if I had already ceased to exist. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and celebration, I felt colder than the snow outside, realizing that the people who gave me life had erased me as if I were nothing. It was 1 in the morning on Christmas night in Boston, 2021. The Caldwell house glowed with garlands and golden lights. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air, and the hum of carols wrapped around the chatter of relatives. Laughter drifted across the long dining table. My glass of wine was untouched. I felt like an outsider sitting among people who carried my blood. My father Howard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My mother Eleanor joined him, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The room hushed as if a switch had been flipped. Every eye turned toward me. My father's voice rang out cold and deliberate. "Marissa is no longer our daughter." The words sliced through me. The silverware clattered and someone gasped. A red stain spread across the tablecloth where a glass tipped, but no one moved to clean it. My mother added in a sharper tone, "You have become a disgrace to this family. We will not let you drag our name any lower." My heart hammered in my chest. I tried to speak my throat dry. "Dad? Mom, how can you say that?" The words cracked weak against the weight of their condemnation. Nathan, my older brother, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction, as if this had been his victory all along. "Better this way, Marissa. You never belonged." His voice carried across the table like poison. Claire, my younger sister, sat frozen. Her eyes watered, but she pressed her lips together, unable to speak. I looked at her silently, begging for her to defend me, but she lowered her gaze. Her silence was as heavy as the accusations. The whispers started. One aunt muttered that it was bound to happen. An uncle shook his head as though I had brought this upon myself. My skin burned with shame, though the chill from the drafty windows seeped into my bones. I rose suddenly, my chair screeching across the floor. My legs trembled, but I forced them to carry me. The room watched as I walked past my parents, past Nathan's smug grin, past Claire's trembling hands. My chest ached with every step. I did not look at anyone again. The hallway was dim compared to the glaring light of the dining room. My heels echoed on the wooden floorboards. The sound of carols grew faint as I pushed open the front door. A rush of icy wind hit me. Snow fell steadily, glittering under the street lamp. I stepped outside without a coat. The cold bit into my skin, sharp and merciless, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still here, still breathing. I stood for a moment on the porch, staring at the glowing wreath on the door. Hours ago it had symbolized warmth and unity. Now it mocked me, shining over a house that no longer held a place for me. My breath clouded in front of me, my eyes stung with tears. I walked down the steps, my shoes crunching into the fresh snow. Behind me, muffled laughter floated through the walls, mingled with the clinking of glasses, as though nothing had happened. I reached the street, the houses around me twinkling with lights, families gathered inside with joy. My own family had cast me out like a shadow. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, yet I kept moving forward. The air carried the faint sound of church bells in the distance, striking the hour. The toll echoed through the frozen street, each chime a reminder that a part of my life had ended. I stopped under a lamppost, the snow swirling around me, and looked back once at the house on the hill. The windows glowed warm, but I felt nothing but ice. I turned away, the decision final. I did not know where I would go or how I would survive, but I knew one thing with certainty. I would never step through that door again. And if they thought they had destroyed me, they would learn soon enough that they had only given me a reason to fight. I kept walking through the empty street, snowflakes clinging to my lashes, and my mind slipped backward to the years that had led me here. It was not the words spoken at 1 in the morning that truly destroyed me, but the countless moments before when I had already been made to feel invisible. When I was a little girl in Cambridge, I loved to draw. I would spend hours sketching houses, reimagining them in colors and shapes that made me happy. My father would look at my work with a dismissive shake of his head and remind me that real success came from square footage and closing deals. Nathan, even as a teenager, would sit at the dinner table talking about interest rates and development projects, and my parents would beam with pride as though he were already a titan of industry. I remember the summer I won a scholarship to study design in New York. I carried the letter home like a treasure, my heart ready to burst. My mother placed it on the counter without reading it and told me to wash my hands for dinner. That same evening, Nathan announced that he had joined a summer internship at a local real estate office. The table erupted in applause, while I sat silent with my untouched plate, the scholarship letter folded in my pocket like it had never existed. Years later, I competed in an international design competition. I spent months preparing, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, and when my design won first place, I thought perhaps this would finally be the moment. I called home from Milan expecting cheers. My father only asked if I was planning to come back soon and get a real job. I never mentioned that award again. The certificate still sits in a box in my apartment, unseen by anyone but me. The deepest cut came on the day of my graduation from Harvard's design program. I searched the crowded auditorium, scanning faces for my parents. I imagined my father's proud smile, my mother's embrace, Nathan clapping for me for once. The ceremony ended, my classmates ran into their families' arms, and I stood alone on the steps with my cap in my hand. I called my mother, my voice shaking, and she said they were attending the launch of Nathan's new development project in Back Bay. I hung up before she could finish. That day, I promised myself never to expect anything from them again. I poured everything into my work, taking freelance projects, building a small portfolio, carving out a place for myself without their support. I learned to pay my own rent, to fix a broken sink, to fight for every client. Yet no matter how independent I became, the absence of their acknowledgement gnawed at me. I lived with that hollow ache, convincing myself I could endure it. And then came Christmas night. That public rejection was not a surprise carved out of nowhere. It was the final crack in a wall that had been crumbling for decades. Their words were only the echo of every slight, every dismissal, every time they chose Nathan's victories over my existence. The snow crunched under my shoes as I reached the corner of the block. My breath turned white against the black sky. I thought of the little girl clutching her drawings, waiting for her father to say he was proud. I thought of the young woman on the graduation steps, her phone pressed to her ear, her heart breaking quietly. That girl had been left behind long before tonight. A light flickered in the window of a nearby brownstone. Inside, I could see a family gathered around a piano, singing together, their voices muffled but warm. I stood there watching until my chest hurt too much. I turned away and kept walking, each step heavier but steadier. I knew I could not let the wounds of the past chain me forever. Yet even as I tried to push forward, one question gnawed at me. If my parents had cast me out so ruthlessly, what had Nathan done to place himself so firmly in their favor that they would cut their own daughter loose for him? I remember passing the study that night, my footsteps echoing in the hallway, while the laughter from the dining room dulled behind me. The door was almost closed, just a sliver of light spilling across the rug, and voices leaked through the gap. I stopped without meaning to, my hand hovering near the doorknob. It was my mother's voice, first low and tense, followed by Nathan's sharper tone. The words that drifted out froze me in place. Di chuk moi. Everything signed over. No mention of Marissa. My breath caught as my mother murmured about the Beacon Hill house and the land in Cape Cod, then about the shares in Caldwell Realty. She hesitated, but Nathan cut her off with a tone dripping with satisfaction. From now on, no one can stand in my way. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It was not enough that they had disowned me in front of everyone. Now my very name was erased from the legal ties that bound us as a family. Claire was mentioned only briefly, a symbolic portion that sounded more like pity than love. The rest, every piece of history and value, handed to Nathan. I pressed my back to the wall, listening, my heart pounding. My mother's voice trembled as she asked if this was really necessary. Nathan's reply was quick. "If you want to protect the family's reputation, this is the only way. Dad knows it." The tone in his voice was not persuasion. It was command. I felt dizzy, gripping the wall to steady myself. Questions battered my mind. Had my father truly agreed to this willingly? Or had Nathan coerced them, feeding them fear until they surrendered? My mother sounded tired, not triumphant. My father's voice never entered the conversation. That absence screamed louder than anything. I stepped back before I could be caught, my shoes sinking into the thick carpet, my breath shallow. My body begged me to leave, but my mind clung to every word. The door creaked slightly, and I turned away quickly, hurrying down the hall, pretending I had seen nothing. My hands shook as I reached the foyer, staring at the wreath on the door again, the same glow that mocked me earlier. Outside, the snow kept falling. I stood on the porch, my thoughts spinning. The betrayal was complete. Not only had I been cut out of their hearts, but now I was being written out of the family's legacy. Every brick of that Beacon Hill house, every acre in Cape Cod, every dollar of stock in the company that bore our name, all transferred into Nathan's control. He had won, and I had been erased. I pulled my coat tighter and walked down the steps, the cold air slicing through me. My shoes crunched on the ice as I whispered to myself, "Why?" The question burned unanswered. I knew my parents were proud of Nathan, but what I heard was not pride. It was surrender. And surrender only happens when someone is cornered. I wandered into the quiet street, the holiday lights blurring through my tears. Images of my childhood collided with the reality I had just overheard. Nathan's smug smile at the table made sense now. He had been waiting for this. The inheritance, the power, the complete favor of our parents. I wondered how long he had been planning and how much he had twisted to make it happen. I stopped under a lamppost, my breath sharp in the frozen air. I had no proof, only words whispered through a door. But proof could be found. Documents, signatures, witnesses. My chest rose with something new, not just pain, but a spark of defiance. If they thought I would vanish quietly, they did not know me at all. The bells from the church down the street rang again, their sound carrying through the cold night. Each strike of the hour felt like a warning and a promise. I turned away from the glow of my parents' house and walked into the darkness, already knowing what I needed to do. The truth was buried somewhere, and I would uncover it no matter what it cost. The knock on the door startled me the next morning. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the whispers I had overheard, every word echoing in my skull. I opened the door expecting Rachel or perhaps a neighbor, but it was Claire. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her blonde hair damp with melting snow, and her eyes already brimming with tears. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, in a way that made my heart twist. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. I closed the door and waited, but she could not hold her silence for long. The tears spilled before she could speak, and then the words tumbled out in a rush. "Marissa, I know what Nathan did. He forced them. He used the debts from Caldwell Realty, told Dad that if he did not sign, everything would collapse, and the family's name would be ruined." I stared at her, my stomach tightening. She wiped her face with her sleeve, her voice trembling. "Nathan said you embarrassed the family by chasing art, by refusing to follow tradition, and that the only way to preserve our name was to erase you." He twisted everything until Mom and Dad believed him. Her confession burned, but not in the way I expected. I did not feel anger at her, only a strange relief that someone else had seen the truth. I took her hand, cold and shaking, and whispered that I did not blame her for staying silent. Fear had trapped her as surely as betrayal had caged me. Claire's voice cracked as she went on. "I saw the emails, Marissa. Mom wrote to Nathan begging him to stop. She was terrified. She said she could not handle the pressure, but he told her this was the only way." I felt my chest tighten again, but this time it was not helplessness. It was fury laced with clarity. I asked if she still had those emails. She nodded, hesitant. "I can get them. They are on Mom's account." I bit my lip, torn between dread and determination. Those emails could be the first threads that led to unraveling Nathan's scheme. We sat at the small kitchen table, steam rising from 2 cups of coffee I had made without tasting. Claire twisted the mug between her hands, staring down as if afraid of my judgment. Finally, she whispered, "I wanted to speak up last night, but I was so afraid. If I defended you, I thought they would cut me out too." My throat tightened, my eyes burning, but I squeezed her hand. "You do not have to explain. You are here now. That is what matters." For a long moment, the silence between us felt heavy, but not unbearable. It carried something new, a fragile bond. I had walked into the night believing I was utterly alone. Now across the table, I saw that I was not. Claire straightened slightly, her voice steadier. "I want to help you. Whatever Nathan has done, it cannot stand. I do not care if they push me out. I am tired of living in fear of him." Her words filled the room like a spark in dry wood, igniting something inside me that had been smothered for too long. I leaned back in my chair, breathing slowly. The truth had a witness. The silence of the house was broken. I was no longer the only one carrying this secret. And as I looked at my sister, I realized that this was not just my fight anymore. But if Nathan had gone so far as to manipulate our parents with threats and forged loyalty, I knew there had to be more. The question was not only what he had already taken, but how far he was willing to go to keep it. The weeks that followed felt like walking through glass, every step painful, yet strangely clarifying. Word spread quickly in Cambridge. At the corner market, I caught the whispers. She must have done something terrible for her parents to cut her out. At the coffee shop, 2 women lowered their voices as I passed, saying I had shamed the Caldwells. Each rumor cut deep, but I refused to let their judgment bury me. Rachel opened her apartment to me without hesitation. She cleared a room, handed me a spare set of keys, and reminded me every morning that I was not broken. On nights when I could not sleep, she sat with me on the couch, a blanket over our legs, telling me that sometimes families fail us, and we have to create our own. Her kindness held me together when I wanted to collapse. Michael reappeared in my life unexpectedly. We had studied together at Harvard, and when he heard what happened, he called. His voice was calm, steady, offering not pity, but opportunity. He connected me with a friend looking for a designer to renovate a small cafe in Somerville. It was not glamorous work, but it was a start. I poured myself into the project, sketching late into the night, sanding wood with blistered hands, picking colors that could transform a tired space into something alive again. That first paycheck was modest, yet when I held it, tears blurred my vision. It was proof that I could stand on my own, even if the world branded me unworthy. From there, more jobs trickled in. A family wanted their living room redesigned, a small firm asked for help with an office remodel. I accepted every project, no matter how small. I worked until my body ached, until paint clung to my skin and coffee became my lifeline. I no longer chased my parents' approval. I chased the quiet pride of seeing a room change under my hands. For the first time, I was not designing to prove myself to them. I was designing to build myself anew. Still, the nights were heavy. Lying awake in Rachel's spare room, I often thought of Claire and the fear in her voice when she confessed the truth. I wondered what Nathan was plotting while I struggled to rebuild brick by brick. I knew him too well. He was not content with taking everything once. He would fight to keep his power, and he would not hesitate to crush me if I tried to rise again. I stared at the ceiling, exhaustion pressing down on me, but my resolve only sharpened. If survival meant working until I broke, I would. If redemption meant exposing what Nathan had done, I would find a way. The gossip of neighbors, the silence of my parents, the smirk on my brother's face, none of it would define me. I would define myself. One evening after finishing a project, I walked home with sawdust still on my clothes. The city lights shimmered on the Charles River, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. But as I stood there watching the reflection of the skyline, I knew the fight was far from over. Claire's emails, my suspicions about forged pressure, the whispers I overheard in the study, all of it pointed to something bigger. And if I wanted to reclaim not only my name, but the truth itself, I needed more than resilience and hard work. I needed proof, and proof meant stepping back into the shadows of the family I thought I had left behind. I sat in the office of Samuel Hargrove with my hands clenched on my lap, my pulse steady but heavy. The room smelled faintly of leather and old paper lined with shelves of case files and framed certificates. Samuel was a man in his mid-40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to cut through pretense. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything from the Christmas night humiliation to the whispers I overheard by the study door. When I finished, he folded his hands and leaned forward. "If you want to challenge the will, you need to prove coercion. It is not enough to say you were excluded. The law protects freedom of choice, but if your parents were pressured or threatened, that changes everything." His voice carried no softness, only precision. I felt my throat tighten, but nodded. Claire had already given me the email she copied from our mother's account. I slid the folder across the desk, my fingers trembling. Samuel opened it, his eyes scanning quickly. The sentences I had already memorized stared back at me. "Nathan, you said if we did not sign, the company would collapse. I cannot carry this weight anymore. I have no choice." Samuel looked up at me. "This is strong. It shows fear and lack of free will. Combined with testimony, it could build a case. But we will need more. A paper trail corroboration witnesses who noticed your parents under duress." He began jotting notes in a neat hand, already structuring a strategy. I asked what that meant for me. He leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "We gather documents. We find anyone who interacted with your parents during that period, anyone who heard Nathan speak about pressure or threats. We create a timeline that reveals manipulation. Without that, this is just a family quarrel. With it, this becomes a case of fraud." The word fraud hung in the air. It was heavier than betrayal. It meant Nathan had not only broken trust, but broken the law. Claire joined us later that afternoon, her face pale but determined. She repeated what she had seen, how Nathan used the debts of Caldwell Realty as a weapon. Samuel asked careful questions, making sure her words were precise. Claire admitted she had heard our mother crying on the phone more than once, saying she did not want to sign, but felt she had to. Samuel tapped his pen against his notebook. "This strengthens the claim. But Claire, are you ready to testify if it comes to that?" Claire hesitated, then straightened. "Yes. I cannot stay silent anymore." My chest swelled with both fear and gratitude. For the first time, I felt like we were not drifting in a void. We were building something solid, brick by brick. Samuel outlined the next steps. He would draft a preliminary petition to the probate court in Suffolk County. We would request discovery of the will and supporting documents. He advised me to prepare for backlash for Nathan to counter with every weapon he had. "You need to understand, this is not only about inheritance, it is about reputation. He will paint you as the ungrateful daughter, the failure. Are you ready to stand against that?" I thought of the whispers in the market, the pitying glances, the way people already believed I was the problem. I met Samuel's eyes. "I have lived with their silence for years. I can live with their scorn, too." He nodded, satisfied. "Then we begin." When I left the office, the winter sun had already dipped behind the skyline. The streets of downtown Boston were slick with ice, the traffic lights casting long reflections across the pavement. Claire walked beside me, quiet, until we reached the corner. She touched my arm. "I am scared, Marissa. But I think for the first time we are doing the right thing." I pulled her close, feeling the weight of her hand. The right thing always comes with fear. But it is the only way forward. We parted ways and I stood alone on the sidewalk, the city humming around me. My fingers tightened on the folder of emails, the fragile proof of a darker truth. It was only the beginning, but I knew Nathan would not sit quietly while I built a case against him. And the thought that haunted me was what lengths he might go to when he realized his control was slipping. The morning of the hearing in March of 2022 was gray and biting cold. I stood outside the Suffolk County Probate Court, with my scarf pulled tight, watching Nathan stride up the steps with two attorneys at his side. Cameras flashed as he passed, his chin lifted as if the whole thing were beneath him. I heard the reporters asking about his sister, the ungrateful daughter, the disgrace. He did not look back at me once. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy, the kind of silence that swallows sound. Nathan's lawyers wasted no time. They painted me as selfish, rebellious, incapable of honoring our family's legacy. They called me unfit, accused me of tarnishing the Caldwell name. My stomach twisted as they spoke, but I sat still, my hands folded tightly, waiting. When it was my turn, Samuel rose calmly. He placed the printed emails on the evidence table, the same ones Claire had retrieved. His voice was steady as he read them aloud. My mother's words trembled on the page. "Nathan, you said if we did not sign the company would fall. I cannot carry this burden. I have no choice." The courtroom stirred whispers rippling like wind through dry leaves. Claire took the stand next. Her face was pale, but her voice did not shake. She spoke of nights she had heard our mother crying, of Nathan's threats tied to the debts at Caldwell Realty, of his insistence that I was a shame to the family. Nathan's lawyer tried to rattle her, accusing her of siding with me for personal gain, but Claire held her ground. I felt tears sting my eyes as I watched my little sister defend me with a strength I had not known she possessed. Then came Reverend Hale. For years he had stood by my parents, repeating their words about tradition and respectability. But now he looked directly at the judge and admitted that Nathan had come to him boasting. He told me his sisters would be left with nothing. He said it proudly, as if cutting them out proved his strength. The Reverend's voice carried shame as he added that he had ignored the warning signs for too long. The blow that truly cracked Nathan's defense arrived when Mrs. Palmer, my mother's longtime friend, was called. She hesitated at first, her eyes darting between Nathan and the floor, but when pressed, she exhaled and spoke. "Nathan told me outright that his sisters were obstacles. He said he would make sure nothing was left for them, that he would have it all." The words landed like a hammer in the silent room. I looked at Nathan then. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white on the table, but his mask of control had finally slipped. For the first time, he looked cornered. Judge Linda Barrett leaned forward, her expression unreadable as she announced the finding. "The court determines that the will was signed under duress and coercion. The document is null and void. Furthermore, given the testimony and evidence presented, this court recommends investigation into financial misconduct at Caldwell Realty." The gavel struck once, a sound final and irrevocable. My breath escaped me in a rush I did not know I had been holding. Tears blurred my vision, not from grief this time, but from release. The truth, long buried under lies and manipulation, had finally been spoken aloud. Around me, the room erupted in murmurs, some in shock, some in pity, some in quiet satisfaction. Nathan sat motionless, his face pale, his empire beginning to crack beneath him. Claire touched my shoulder gently, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest ease. Yet as we stepped out into the cold air, the cameras flashing once more, I knew this battle was not over. The court had spoken, but Nathan's pride would not let him accept defeat so easily, and I feared what he might attempt once the walls around him began to fall. The weeks after the ruling were a blur of headlines and hushed conversations. The Boston Globe ran articles about Caldwell Realty's sudden decline, and local news stations reported that Nathan had been suspended from all managerial duties while auditors combed through the company's books. The once polished name that had hovered over downtown projects was now whispered with suspicion. Each article I saw was like watching a tower crumble in slow motion. Howard and Eleanor retreated behind closed doors. Neighbors said they rarely left the Beacon Hill house, and when they did, they walked quickly with eyes fixed to the ground. Not once did they call me. Not once did they apologize. I told myself I no longer needed it, though a quiet part of me still wished they could see me without the fog Nathan had cast. I focused on what I could control. With the settlement of the estate still pending, I rented a small apartment in Cambridge and turned the sunlit living room into a design studio. The space smelled of fresh paint and coffee sketches and samples scattered across the tables. Clients began to come by, drawn less by my family name than by my vision. For the first time, my work carried only my signature. Teaching part-time at a community design program gave me another kind of fulfillment, standing in front of young students watching their faces light up as they sketched. I remembered the little girl I once was, hungry for encouragement. I gave them what I had longed to hear. Your ideas matter. Your vision matters. Claire became my constant ally. She often came over on weekends, helping with community projects, or simply sitting with me while I planned. We laughed more than we cried. Sometimes she admitted she still carried guilt for staying silent that Christmas night, but I reminded her that she had found her voice when it mattered most. By December of 2023, a year after that night, my life no longer resembled the broken pieces I had carried out into the snow. On Christmas Eve, I sat by the window of my apartment, the streets below strung with lights that glowed softly against the snow. I sipped tea, feeling warmth in a way I had not thought possible again. The memory of 1 in the morning on that brutal night still lived inside me, but it had changed shape. It was no longer only a wound. It was the spark that forced me to build something new. I was not the daughter erased from a will. I was a woman who had rebuilt herself, who had carved a space in the world through resilience. I whispered into the quiet room, as if speaking to whoever might need to hear it. If you have ever been cast aside, if you have ever been told you are nothing, remember this. Justice may come late, but it will come. And even if no one else believes in you, you must not lose yourself. The city bells rang out midnight, their sound carrying over the rooftops. I closed my eyes, let the sound wash over me, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. If this story has reached you, let me know where you are listening from. Share your thoughts with me because every voice matters. And if you want to hear more journeys of struggle and justice, stay with me here. Our stories can light the way for someone still walking through the dark.